The gunshot that split the night air sent Nora Zimmerman running through the dark streets of Willits, California, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she clutched the torn fabric of her dress at her shoulder. Behind her, angry voices echoed off the wooden storefronts, and she knew they would not stop searching until dawn. The saloon where she had worked as a server for the past 3 months had become a trap tonight when the owner decided she owed him more than just honest labor. And when his business partner had objected to his forceful advances, the confrontation had turned deadly. Now they would blame her for the violence, just as they always blamed women like her for the sins of powerful men. She stumbled down an alley, her worn boots catching on loose stones, and found herself at the edge of town, where a modest ranch spread out under the starlit sky. A stable sat several yards from the main house, its door slightly ajar, and without thinking twice, Nora slipped inside. The warm smell of hay and horses enveloped her, and for the first time in hours, she felt her racing heart begin to slow. She found an empty stall in the back corner, burrowed into the clean straw, and pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders. Sleep came despite her fear, exhaustion finally claiming what adrenaline could no longer sustain. Dawn broke with the sound of boots on wooden planks and the gentle nickering of horses greeting their owner. Nora's eyes flew open as reality crashed back, and she pressed herself deeper into the straw, hoping the shadows would hide her. The footsteps drew closer, accompanied by a low, melodic whistle that spoke of a man comfortable in his solitude. "Easy there, Maverick," a deep voice said, and Nora heard the sound of a stall door opening nearby. "You are hungry this morning, aren't you, boy?" She remained perfectly still, barely breathing, as the man moved from stall to stall, greeting each horse by name and checking their water. His voice carried the rough warmth of someone who spoke more often to animals than people, and despite her fear, there was something reassuring in his steady, unhurried movements. Then his footsteps stopped. Nora could feel him standing just outside her hiding place, and she knew he had spotted something amiss. The stall door creaked open, and morning light spilled across the straw where she lay curled up. "Well now," the voice said, lower and more cautious than before. "I was not expecting to find anyone here." Nora slowly sat up, pushing the straw from her dark hair, and found herself looking into the weathered face of a man perhaps 30 years old, with brown eyes that held more curiosity than anger. He wore simple ranch clothes, a worn leather vest over a chambray shirt, and his hat was pushed back on his head, revealing sun-streaked brown hair. His hand rested near his hip, not quite on the revolver that hung there, but close enough to react if needed. "Please," Nora said, her voice hoarse from the cold night air. "Please do not turn me in. I had nowhere safe to go." The man studied her for a long moment, taking in her torn dress, her disheveled appearance, and the fear that must have been written clearly across her face. His expression softened slightly, though caution remained in his eyes. "I am not in the habit of turning away folks in trouble," he said finally. "But I would appreciate knowing why you are hiding in my stable and what kind of trouble you have brought to my door." Nora pulled herself to her feet, brushing straw from her skirts with trembling hands. Standing, she was perhaps 23 or 24, with dark eyes that had seen too much hardship for her years. "My name is Nora Zimmerman. I worked at the Silver Dollar Saloon in town, just serving tables and cleaning. Last night, the owner, Mr. Garrett, he tried to force himself on me. His partner, Mr. Davies, tried to stop him, and there was a fight. A gun went off. When I ran, Mr. Garrett was screaming that I had caused it all, that I would hang for what happened." "Did you see who fired the gun?" the cowboy asked, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "Mr. Davies was trying to pull Mr. Garrett off me. The gun was in Mr. Garrett's hand. I heard the shot, saw Mr. Davies fall, and I ran. I did not stay to see if he was alive or dead. I just knew I would be blamed. The man was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. My name is Daniel Crawford. This is my ranch, small as it is. I run cattle and break horses, and I mind my own business, which has served me well these past 5 years. He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. But I also know Thomas Garrett's reputation. He is a mean drunk and meaner sober, and he has powerful friends in this town. If he says you are responsible for shooting his partner, most folks will believe him without asking questions. Then I should go, Nora said, though her voice wavered. I should not bring this trouble to you. Go where? Daniel asked, his tone practical rather than unkind. You have no horse, no supplies, and if what you say is true, half the town will be looking for you by now. You would not make it 5 miles before someone found you. Then what should I do? Nora asked, and hated how small her voice sounded. Daniel removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, clearly thinking. First, you need food and proper rest. Then we need to find out exactly what happened last night and whether Mr. Davies lived or died. The truth has a way of mattering, even in a town like Willits, if you know how to present it right. Why would you help me? Nora asked, searching his face for some hidden motive. You do not know me, I could be lying. You could be, Daniel agreed. But I have spent enough time with horses to know when a creature is truly frightened versus when it is just acting ornery. You have the look of someone who has been running for her life, not someone who committed murder and felt no remorse. That counts for something in my book. He gestured toward the stable door. The house is not much, but it is warm and the doors lock solid. You can clean up and I will fix some breakfast. Then we can figure out what comes next. Nora hesitated, every instinct warning her not to trust so easily. But exhaustion and hunger and the simple kindness in Daniel's eyes won out over caution. She followed him across the yard to a modest ranch house built from weathered wood, with a covered porch and windows that looked out over the small valley where his cattle grazed. Inside, the house was neat and sparsely furnished, clearly the home of a man who lived alone and kept to simple necessities. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a kitchen area with a cast iron stove occupied the corner. Daniel pointed her toward a wash basin and a clean towel, then busied himself with building up the fire and setting a coffee pot to boil. Nora washed her face and hands, marveling at the simple luxury of clean water and soap. When she caught her reflection in the small mirror above the basin, she barely recognized herself. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and a bruise was forming on her cheek where Mr. Garrett had struck her. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing the scratches beneath. Here, Daniel said quietly, appearing beside her with a clean shirt. It will be too big, but it is better than that torn dress. You can change in the back room there. The back room turned out to be Daniel's bedroom, simple and orderly like the rest of the house. Nora changed quickly, grateful for the modest coverage the oversized shirt provided, even if she had to roll the sleeves up several times. When she emerged, Daniel had set 2 plates on the small kitchen table, each loaded with fried eggs, bacon, and thick slices of bread. They ate in silence at first, Nora too hungry to make conversation, and Daniel seemingly content with quiet. But as the food settled in her stomach and warmth from the fire seeped into her bones, Nora found herself studying her unlikely rescuer. Daniel Crawford moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. His hands were calloused from hard work, and he ate with the practical efficiency of someone who viewed meals as fuel rather than entertainment. But there was a gentleness in the way he poured her coffee and passed her the salt that spoke of someone who had not always lived alone. "You said you have been running this ranch for 5 years?" Nora asked finally, breaking the silence. Daniel nodded. "Came out here from Missouri after the war ended in '65. California seemed like a place where a man could start over without too many questions about his past. Bought this land cheap because the previous owner gave up after 2 hard winters. Built it up slow and steady. It is not much, but it is mine." "It seems peaceful," Nora said, looking out the window at the golden morning light spreading across the hills. "I imagine that means something after seeing war." "It does," Daniel agreed simply. He took a sip of his coffee, then met her eyes across the table. "What about you, Miss Zimmerman? How did you end up in Willits working for a man like Thomas Garrett?" Nora wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, drawing warmth from the ceramic. "My father died 3 years ago back in Ohio. He was a carpenter, a good one, but when he got sick there was no money for doctors. After he passed, I found out he had debts I knew nothing about. The bank took our house, took everything. I had an aunt in Sacramento, so I used what little money I could scrape together for a ticket west. But when I got there, I found out my aunt had passed away the previous winter. I had no money, no family, nowhere to go." She paused, staring into her coffee as memories flickered behind her eyes. "I worked odd jobs where I could find them, but it is not easy for a woman alone. Places either want to pay you nothing or expect you to earn your keep in ways I refuse to consider. I heard there was work in the northern towns, so I made my way up through the valley. Willits seemed small enough to be safe, and Mr. Garrett offered me a job serving tables. He promised decent wages and respectable work. But it was not respectable," Daniel said quietly. "Not the way he saw it," Nora replied, meeting his gaze. "At first it was just comments, the kind men make when they think you should take it as a compliment. Then it was his hand on my arm too long or brushing against me when he passed. I tried to ignore it, tried to stay out of his way. But last night he had been drinking, and when I went to the back room to fetch more clean glasses, he followed me. He grabbed me, tore my dress, said I had been teasing him long enough and it was time I showed proper gratitude for his generosity." Her voice remained steady, but her hands tightened around the cup. "Mr. Davies heard me cry out. He came in and told Mr. Garrett to let me go, that he was drunk and being a fool. They argued and then they were fighting, truly fighting. Mr. Garrett pulled his gun, and I thought he was going to shoot me. Mr. Davies grabbed his arm, they struggled, and the gun went off. Mr. Davies fell. There was blood. Mr. Garrett started screaming that I had caused it, that I was a witch who drove men to violence and I needed to hang, so I ran." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "Thomas Garrett is a coward and a liar, but he is also rich and connected. His brother is on the town council. If he says you are responsible, proving otherwise will be difficult." "Then I should run," Nora said again. "I should leave California entirely, start over somewhere else." "You could," Daniel acknowledged, "but running for the rest of your life is no way to live, and if Mr. Davies died, you would be wanted for murder. That is not something you can outrun forever. What choice do I have?" Nora asked, and for the first time, tears threatened at the corners of her eyes. "I am alone. I have no money, no influential friends, no one to speak for me. Who would believe my word against his?" Daniel stood and walked to the window, looking out over his small ranch. When he spoke, his voice was firm with decision. "I will ride into town this morning. I will find out what happened to Mr. Davies and what story Thomas Garrett is telling. I know a few people who might speak honestly if asked the right way. While I am gone, you stay here. Keep the doors locked and stay away from the windows. Can you shoot a gun if you need to?" Nora shook her head. My father did not believe in keeping firearms in the house. Daniel walked to a cabinet and pulled out a rifle, checking it was loaded before setting it by the door. This is a Winchester. If someone you do not know tries to come in, you point it at them and you pull this trigger. The kick will be strong, so brace yourself. But mostly, you will not need it. Just knowing you have it should give you some peace of mind. Mr. Crawford, Nora began, but he held up a hand. Daniel, he corrected. And you do not need to thank me. I have never been one to stand by when someone needs help, and I will not start now. Just stay hidden and stay safe. I will be back before evening. After Daniel rode off on a sturdy buckskin horse he called Maverick, Nora found herself alone in the quiet ranch house. She cleaned up the breakfast dishes, more to keep herself busy than out of any sense of obligation, and then paced the small rooms like a caged animal. Every sound from outside made her jump, every bird call or cattle low sending her heart racing. But as the morning wore into afternoon and no angry mob appeared at the door, she began to breathe easier. She found herself studying the details of Daniel's home, trying to understand this man who had shown her kindness when he had every reason to turn her away. The house was clean but impersonal, with few decorations or personal touches. A single photograph sat on the mantel, showing a young couple she assumed were his parents. No pictures of a wife or children, no feminine touches that suggested a woman's presence. On a shelf near the fireplace, she found a small collection of books, worn from reading. Poetry by Whitman, adventure novels by Dumas, and a leather-bound journal with no writing inside, as if he had bought it with intentions but never found the words to fill it. It painted a picture of a solitary man, someone who valued quiet and simplicity, but perhaps also felt the weight of loneliness more than he cared to admit. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western hills when Nora heard the sound of a horse approaching. She grabbed the rifle with shaking hands and positioned herself away from the windows, just as Daniel had instructed. But when the door opened, it was Daniel himself who entered, his expression grim but not despairing. "You can put the rifle down," he said gently. "It is just me, and I come bearing news." Nora set the weapon aside and moved closer. "What did you learn?" Daniel removed his hat and hung it on a peg by the door. "Mr. Davies is alive. The bullet caught him in the shoulder and he lost a lot of blood, but the doctor says he will recover." That is the good news. The bad news is that Thomas Garrett is indeed telling everyone you shot his partner in a fit of madness. He claims you were angry about being dismissed from your position for stealing and that you attacked them both. "That is a lie," Nora said, her voice rising. "All of it is a lie." "I know," Daniel said calmly, "and so does at least one other person. I spoke with Mary Chen, the woman who runs the boarding house next to the saloon. She heard the whole thing through the wall. She heard you scream, heard Mr. Garrett's threats, heard the argument and the gunshot. She is willing to tell the truth if asked, but she is afraid. Mr. Garrett has threatened to ruin her business if she speaks against him." "Then we have nothing," Nora said, sinking into a chair. "One frightened woman's testimony against a powerful man's lies." "Not quite nothing," Daniel said. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "I also spoke with the deputy sheriff, a man named Tom Wilson. He is young and still idealistic enough to care about the truth. He does not like Thomas Garrett and has been looking for a reason to challenge him for a while. But he needs evidence, not just accusations." "What kind of evidence?" Nora asked. "The kind that Mr. Davies himself could provide," Daniel said. "If he is conscious and able to speak, he could tell the true story of what happened. From what I learned, Davies is actually a decent man who only went into business with Garrett because he needed the capital. They have been at odds for months over how Garrett treats the staff and customers." "Will he speak for me?" Nora asked, barely daring to hope. I do not know, Daniel admitted. But Deputy Wilson is going to try to speak with him tomorrow once the doctor says he is strong enough. In the meantime, you need to stay hidden. Garrett has offered a $50 reward for information leading to your capture. That is enough money to make even honest people consider bending their principles. Nora felt tears of frustration burning behind her eyes. This is insane. I did nothing wrong, and yet I am the one being hunted like a criminal. Daniel reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers. The gesture was simple and unpracticed, as if he was not accustomed to offering comfort, but the warmth of human contact after so much fear and loneliness made Nora's breath catch in her throat. I know it is unjust, he said quietly. I know it is not fair. But the world often is not fair, especially to women who dare to resist men like Thomas Garrett. What matters now is keeping you safe until we can prove the truth. Why are you doing this? Nora asked, looking at their joined hands. You could turn me in and collect that reward yourself. $50 is a lot of money. Daniel's mouth quirked in something that was not quite a smile. I have learned that a man's wealth is not measured in dollars, but in how well he can sleep at night. Turning you in would cost me something far more valuable than $50 could buy. It would cost me the knowledge that I did the right thing. They sat like that for a moment, hands clasped across the simple wooden table. Two people who had been strangers just hours before, but were now bound together by circumstance and choice. When Daniel finally withdrew his hand, Nora felt the loss of his warmth like a physical thing. You should get some rest, Daniel said, standing. You can take the bedroom. I will sleep out here by the fire. Tomorrow we wait for word from Deputy Wilson and hope that Mr. Davies has the courage to tell the truth. I cannot take your bed, Nora protested. You have already done too much. The bed is just sitting there empty, Daniel replied practically. May as well have someone use it who needs proper rest. I have spent plenty of nights sleeping on harder surfaces than a rug in front of a warm fire. I insist. Nora wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was pulling at her with leaden hands. She nodded her thanks and retreated to the small bedroom, where she lay down on the narrow bed still wearing Daniel's oversized shirt. The pillow smelled faintly of sage and leather, and despite her fear and uncertainty about the future, she fell asleep within minutes. She woke several times during the night, confused about where she was until memory returned. Each time, she heard Daniel moving quietly in the main room, keeping watch, and the sound of his steady presence allowed her to drift back to sleep. Morning came with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Nora rose and washed her face, braiding her dark hair back in a practical plait. When she emerged, she found Daniel had already been out to tend the horses and was now preparing breakfast with the same efficient competence he seemed to bring to everything. Any news? She asked, though she knew it was too early. Nothing yet, Daniel replied. Deputy Wilson said he would send word if there was anything to report. Until then, we wait. Waiting proved harder than running. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness as Nora tried to make herself useful around the house. She mended a tear in one of Daniel's shirts, swept the floors, and attempted to organize his sparse kitchen supplies. Daniel worked outside for most of the morning, repairing fence posts and checking on his small herd of cattle. When he came in for the midday meal, he found Nora had made a simple stew from the vegetables and salt pork she had found in his larder. You did not have to do all this, Daniel said, looking around at the tidied house. I needed to do something, Nora replied. Sitting idle while you work on my behalf felt wrong. They ate together and conversation came easier than it had the day before. Daniel told her about learning to break horses from an old Mexican rancher, who had taken him under his wing when he first arrived in California. Nora spoke of her childhood in Ohio, of helping her father in his carpentry shop and learning to read from her mother's small collection of books before fever had taken her when Nora was just 12. "You lost your mother young," Daniel observed. "That must have been hard." "It was," Nora said. "But my father tried his best to be both parents. He taught me to be independent, to think for myself. He used to say that a woman with skills and education could weather any storm." "He sounds like a wise man," Daniel said. "He was," Nora agreed softly. "I wish he could have seen California. He always talked about the West, like it was a promised land where anyone could start fresh." "Sometimes it is," Daniel said. "Sometimes it is just another place where people carry their old prejudices and cruelties with them. But I suppose that is true everywhere." As afternoon shadows lengthened across the valley, a horse and rider appeared on the road leading to Daniel's ranch. Both Daniel and Nora tensed, but Daniel recognized the rider and relaxed slightly. "It is Deputy Wilson," he said. "Stay in the bedroom until I know what he wants." Nora retreated to the back room but left the door cracked so she could hear the conversation. She listened as Daniel greeted the deputy and invited him inside. "I came to give you an update," Deputy Wilson said. His voice was younger than Nora had expected, earnest and straightforward. "I spoke with Mr. Davies this morning. He is weak but lucid, and he told me everything that happened. His account matches exactly what you said Miss Zimmerman claimed. Mr. Garrett attempted to assault her, Davies intervened, and Garrett shot him during the struggle." Nora felt her knees go weak with relief and had to brace herself against the door frame. "Will he testify to that officially?" Daniel asked. There was a long pause. "He wants to," Deputy Wilson said slowly, "but he is afraid. Thomas Garrett visited him this morning and made it clear that if Davies contradicts his story, Garrett will destroy him financially and ensure he never works in California again. Davies has a wife and 2 young children back in Sacramento. He cannot afford to make an enemy of Garrett. So he will stay silent and let an innocent woman be condemned." Daniel's voice was hard with anger. "I did not say that," Wilson replied. "I said he is afraid and I understand why, but I have been thinking. If I could get Davies's statement in writing, signed and witnessed, even if he later claimed he was confused due to his injury, that document would carry weight. And if Miss Zimmerman came in voluntarily to give her statement, rather than being dragged in as a fugitive, that would help her case considerably." "You want her to turn herself in?" Daniel asked skeptically. "I want her to come tell the truth officially, with me as her escort and with Davies's written statement to corroborate her story," Wilson clarified. "I have already spoken with Judge Harrison, who happens to be in town for the quarterly circuit court. He is not fond of Garrett either and will give her a fair hearing if we present this right." "And if we present it wrong?" Daniel pressed. "Then she will likely hang," Wilson said bluntly. "I will not lie about the risk. But I believe the truth is her best defense, and the longer she stays a fugitive, the more guilty she appears." Nora could not stay silent any longer. She pushed open the door and stepped into the main room. Deputy Wilson was indeed young, perhaps 26 or 27, with an honest face and determined eyes. "I will do it," she said. "I will come with you and tell the truth." "Nora," Daniel began, but she shook her head. "I cannot hide forever," she said firmly. "And I will not let Mr. Davies suffer for trying to protect me. If there is a chance for justice, I have to take it." Deputy Wilson studied her carefully. "You understand the risk?" "I do," Nora said. "When do we go?" "First light tomorrow," Wilson replied. "That will give me time to get Davies's statement in writing tonight while he is feeling strong. I will come back here at dawn, and we will ride into town together. I will make sure you are treated with respect, and that your safety is guaranteed until the judge hears the case." After Wilson left, Daniel was quiet and tense, moving around the house with barely contained energy. Finally, Nora could not stand it anymore. "Say what you are thinking," she said. Daniel turned to face her. "I think you are being brave but possibly foolish. You are putting your life in the hands of a legal system that has not shown itself to be particularly just toward women or the powerless." "What choice do I have?" Nora asked. "Keep hiding. Run further. I am tired of being afraid, Daniel. I am tired of being made to feel like I did something wrong when I was the victim. If I have to stand up in a courtroom and tell the truth, knowing I might be condemned for it, at least I will do it with my head held high." Daniel's expression softened. He crossed the room and stood before her, close enough that she could see the concern etched in the lines around his eyes. "You are right. I know you are right. I just wish there was another way, one that did not risk your life." "Why do you care so much?" Nora asked quietly. "We have known each other for less than 2 days. I am a stranger who brought trouble to your door." Daniel was quiet for a moment, seeming to search for the right words. "When I came back from the war," he said slowly, "I was angry at the world. I had seen too much death, too much cruelty, too much proof that people are capable of terrible things. I came out here to get away from all that, to build something simple and clean where I did not have to think about man's capacity for evil." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "But isolation is not the same as peace. I have been alone for 5 years, telling myself that was what I wanted. Then you appeared in my stable, frightened and desperate and trusting me with your safety, despite having no reason to do so. And I realized that maybe what I have been doing is not living but just existing. You remind me that there are things worth standing up for, worth risking something for." Nora felt her heart beating faster. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that whatever happens tomorrow, you will not face it alone," Daniel said. "I will be there with you. I will speak on your behalf. And if this does not go the way we hope, I will help you run and damn the consequences." "Daniel, you could lose everything," Nora protested. "Your ranch, your freedom. None of it means anything if I cannot look at myself in the mirror," Daniel replied simply. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender against her skin. "You deserve justice, Nora Zimmerman. And even if the world does not give it to you, I will do everything in my power to try." Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks, and before she could think better of it, she stepped forward into Daniel's embrace. He held her carefully at first, as if afraid she might break, but when she pressed closer, his arms tightened around her with fierce protectiveness. They stood like that for a long moment, two lonely people finding unexpected solace in each other's presence. When they finally drew apart, the sun was setting outside, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. They ate a quiet dinner, both lost in their own thoughts about what tomorrow might bring. After the dishes were cleared, Daniel taught Nora how to play cards, and they spent the evening engaged in simple games that kept their minds occupied and their fears at bay. As the fire burned low and exhaustion began to claim them, Nora stood to retreat to the bedroom. She paused in the doorway and looked back at Daniel, who was laying out blankets by the hearth. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. No matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know that these 2 days have meant more to me than I can say. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever." "What is that?" Daniel asked. "Hope," Nora replied. "The belief that there are still good people in the world willing to stand up for what is right." Daniel's eyes met hers across the dimly lit room. "Get some rest, Nora. Tomorrow we fight for that hope together." Nora woke before dawn, her stomach twisted with anxiety. She dressed in the cleanest clothes she had, determined to present herself with as much dignity as possible. Daniel was already up, the smell of coffee filling the small house. They ate a simple breakfast in silence, both understanding that words were inadequate to express what they were feeling. When Deputy Wilson arrived as the sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, they were ready. Daniel saddled Maverick while Nora climbed onto a gentle mare Daniel said was named Rosie. The three of them rode toward Willits in the cool morning air, Wilson in the lead, Daniel protectively close to Nora's side. The town was just beginning to stir when they arrived. Wilson led them directly to the small courthouse, a two-story building that served multiple functions for the growing community. Judge Harrison was already waiting in his chambers, a stern-looking man in his 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I understand you have come to give testimony regarding the incident at the Silver Dollar Saloon 3 nights ago." "Yes, Your Honor," Nora said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Before we proceed, you should know that Thomas Garrett has filed formal charges against you for attempted murder and assault. These are serious charges that carry severe penalties if proven." "Do you understand?" "I do, Your Honor." "Very well. Tell me in your own words exactly what happened that night." Nora took a deep breath and began her story, leaving nothing out. She described her months working at the saloon, the escalating harassment from Mr. Garrett, and the events of that terrible night. As she spoke, Judge Harrison listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That is quite an account, Miss Zimmerman. Do you have anyone who can corroborate your version of events?" "I can, Your Honor," Deputy Wilson said, stepping forward. He placed a document on the judge's desk. "This is a signed statement from Mr. Joseph Davies, taken last night while he was lucid and in the presence of witnesses. His account matches Miss Zimmerman's exactly. He clearly states that Mr. Garrett was the aggressor, that he attempted to assault Miss Zimmerman, and that the gun that shot him was in Mr. Garrett's hand." Judge Harrison read the document carefully, his eyebrows rising. "This is quite damning to Mr. Garrett's character. Has anyone else come forward?" Mary Chen, who runs the boarding house adjacent to the saloon, heard the entire confrontation through the wall, Wilson said. She was initially afraid to speak, but after hearing that Davies had given a statement, she has agreed to testify to what she heard. "I see," the judge said. He turned his attention to Daniel. "And you are Mr. Crawford, the rancher who has been sheltering Miss Zimmerman?" "Yes, Your Honor," Daniel said evenly. "She came to my stable seeking sanctuary, and after hearing her story, I believed she was telling the truth." "I still do." "You risked quite a bit on that belief," Judge Harrison observed. "Harboring a fugitive is a serious matter." "She was not a fugitive when I gave her shelter," Daniel replied. "She was a frightened woman seeking help. I would do the same for any person in genuine distress." Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "I have known Thomas Garrett for several years, and I cannot say I have found him to be a man of sterling character. His treatment of those who work for him has been a subject of gossip, though no one has had the courage to challenge him directly given his family's influence." He tapped the document on his desk. "This statement from Mr. Davies, combined with Miss Zimmerman's testimony and the corroborating witness, paints a picture quite different from the one Mr. Garrett has been presenting. However, I cannot simply dismiss the charges without a proper hearing where all parties can present their evidence." Nora felt her heart sink, but Judge Harrison held up a hand. "That said, I see no reason to hold Miss Zimmerman in custody pending that hearing, given that she came forward voluntarily and has shown no inclination to flee. Deputy Wilson, I am releasing Miss Zimmerman on her own recognizance, with Mr. Crawford standing as surety for her appearance. "Thank you, Your Honor," Nora said, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Do not thank me yet," the judge replied. "The hearing will take place in 3 days, and I expect all parties to be present. Mr. Garrett will have an opportunity to present his case, and you will need to be prepared to defend yourself. I suggest you speak with a lawyer if you can afford one." "I cannot afford much of anything, Your Honor," Nora admitted. Judge Harrison frowned thoughtfully. "I will assign Robert Fitzgerald to represent you. He is a competent attorney who does not shy from difficult cases. Deputy Wilson, please inform Mr. Fitzgerald of the situation and send him to speak with Miss Zimmerman." As they left the courthouse, Nora felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders, though she knew the real battle was still to come. Daniel placed a steadying hand on her elbow as they descended the courthouse steps, and the gesture filled her with warmth despite the cool morning air. "That went better than I feared," Deputy Wilson said quietly. "Judge Harrison is a fair man, but he is also cautious. The fact that he released you is a good sign. He would not have done so if he thought you were genuinely guilty." "What happens now?" Nora asked. "Now we prepare for the hearing," Wilson replied. "Bob Fitzgerald will help you with that. In the meantime, I suggest you stay out of town. Garrett has a lot of friends, and they will not be happy to hear you have been released. It would be best if you avoided any confrontations that could complicate things." They rode back to Daniel's ranch in the growing daylight, and Nora felt a complex swirl of emotions. Relief that she had not been immediately arrested, gratitude toward Daniel and Deputy Wilson for standing by her, but also deep anxiety about what the next 3 days would bring. Back at the ranch, Daniel insisted she rest while he tended to the animals and caught up on the work that had been neglected. Nora tried to sleep but found herself too restless. Instead, she cleaned and organized, needing the physical activity to keep her racing thoughts at bay. Late in the afternoon, a buggy appeared on the road leading to the ranch. Daniel emerged from the barn, hand near his gun, but relaxed when he recognized the occupant. A thin man in his 40s climbed down, carrying a leather satchel, his suit dusty from the road. "Mr. Crawford," he called out. "I am Robert Fitzgerald, attorney at law. Judge Harrison sent me to speak with Miss Zimmerman." Daniel invited him inside, and Nora found herself sitting across from yet another stranger on whom her fate depended. But Robert Fitzgerald had kind eyes and a patient manner, and he listened to her story with careful attention, taking detailed notes. "Your case is strong," he said when she finished. "The statement from Mr. Davies is crucial. Without his testimony, it would be your word against Garrett's, and unfortunately, judges and juries tend to favor men of property. But with Davies backing your account and a witness who heard the confrontation, we have a solid defense. What about Mr. Davies being afraid to testify in person?" Nora asked. "Mr. Garrett threatened him." "The written statement will have to suffice," Fitzgerald replied. "I will argue that Davies's condition makes it impossible for him to appear, and the statement was given while events were fresh in his memory. It is not ideal, but it is legally admissible." He spent another hour preparing Nora for what to expect at the hearing, coaching her on how to answer questions and warning her that Mr. Garrett's attorney would try to attack her character. By the time he left, Nora felt marginally more prepared but no less anxious. That night, after a quiet dinner, Nora and Daniel sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The air was cool and clear, carrying the scent of sage and wild grass. "Tell me about your ranch," Nora said, wanting to think about anything other than the hearing. "What made you choose this particular piece of land?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant hills. "When I first came to California, I spent months drifting from place to place, working odd jobs, trying to figure out where I belonged. I ended up in Willits during a harsh winter, working at the livery stable for room and board. One day I was exercising a horse and rode out this direction, and I saw this valley. He gestured to the land stretching before them. It was not much to look at, and the previous owner had let everything go to ruin, but there was something about it that spoke to me. It felt like a place where a man could breathe, where the past did not matter and only what you built with your own hands counted. So I saved every penny, took out a loan I am still paying off, and bought it. "It is beautiful," Nora said softly. "Peaceful." "It has been," Daniel agreed. "Though I will admit, the silence can get oppressive sometimes. I talk to the horses more than I probably should." Nora laughed, a genuine sound that surprised them both. "I think talking to horses is probably healthier than talking to oneself." "I do that too," Daniel admitted with a slight smile. "There are days I go through full conversations with myself, arguing both sides of some trivial decision." "What kinds of decisions?" Nora asked, charmed by this glimpse into his solitary life. "Important matters," Daniel said with mock seriousness. "Whether to fix the fence posts on the north side or the south side first. Whether beans or potatoes are better with salt pork. Truly weighty concerns." Nora found herself laughing again, and Daniel's smile widened at the sound. For a moment, the weight of the coming hearing seemed to lift, and they were just two people enjoying each other's company on a cool evening. "What will you do after the hearing?" Daniel asked, his tone more serious now. "Assuming things go well, where will you go?" The question sobered Nora quickly. "I have not thought that far ahead. I suppose I will need to find work somewhere, try to start over again." "You could stay here," Daniel said quietly. "Not in the house," he added quickly. "I mean, there is plenty of work on a ranch this size. I could use help with the horses, with managing the household, with 100 things I have been neglecting because there is only so much one person can do." "Are you offering me employment, Mr. Crawford?" Nora asked, her heart beating faster. "I suppose I am," Daniel replied. "That is, if you would be interested. The pay would not be much at first, just room and board and whatever I could spare from the ranch profits. But it would be honest work and you would be safe here." Nora studied his profile in the starlight, this unexpected man who had become so important to her in such a short time. "Why are you doing all this, Daniel? And please do not tell me it is just because you believe in helping people. There is something more, something you are not saying." Daniel was silent for a long time, and Nora thought perhaps she had pushed too far. But finally, he turned to face her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had not seen before. "When you appeared in my stable that morning," he said slowly, "frightened and desperate but still fighting, still determined to survive, it woke something in me that I thought had died during the war. For 5 years I have been going through the motions of living, but I have not truly been alive. I have been hiding here, telling myself I was building something when really I was just running away from the world and all its complications." He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "You make me want to engage with life again. You remind me that there are things worth fighting for, worth risking something for. These past few days, having you here, talking with you, learning your story, it has been the most alive I have felt in years. So yes, I am offering you work because you need it, but I am also asking you to stay because I want you to stay. Because the thought of this house going back to being empty and silent feels unbearable now." Nora felt tears welling in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "I want to stay," she whispered, "but I am afraid to hope for that. I am afraid that the hearing will go wrong, or that you will change your mind, or that I will wake up and find this has all been a dream." "It is not a dream," Daniel said. He lifted her hand and pressed it gently against his chest, where she could feel the steady beat of his heart. This is real. Whatever happens at that hearing, whatever comes next, you are not alone anymore. I promise you that. They sat together on the porch long into the night, hands clasped, talking about everything and nothing. Nora told him about her childhood dreams, the books she had loved, the places she wanted to see someday. Daniel spoke of his time in the war, carefully at first, but then with increasing openness as he realized she did not judge him for the things he had seen and done. They talked about the future they might build together, careful not to assume too much but unable to keep hope entirely at bay. When exhaustion finally drove them inside, Nora paused at the door to the bedroom. "Thank you, Daniel, for everything, but especially for making me believe that good things are still possible." "They are possible," Daniel said firmly, "and in 3 days we will prove it." The next 2 days passed in a strange blend of anxious anticipation and unexpected contentment. Daniel taught Nora the basics of working with horses, showing her how to read their moods and body language, how to curry them properly and check their hooves for stones. She proved a quick learner, and Daniel found himself impressed by her natural empathy with the animals. In turn, Nora brought life to the ranch house in ways Daniel had not anticipated. She organized his chaotic kitchen, planted herbs in pots by the door, and filled the quiet spaces with stories and laughter. They fell into an easy rhythm of working together, sharing meals and talking long into the evenings. On the night before the hearing, neither could sleep. They sat by the fire, both pretending to read but really just seeking comfort in each other's presence. "Are you frightened?" Daniel asked finally. "Terrified," Nora admitted, "but also strangely calm. I have done everything I can do. The rest is in the hands of justice, whatever that means." "If it goes wrong," Daniel began, but Nora shook her head. "Do not think about that now. Let us just have this moment here together. That is enough." Daniel moved from his chair to sit beside her on the small sofa. Without speaking, he put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth. They stayed like that until the fire burned low, taking strength from each other's presence. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cold. Nora dressed carefully in a simple blue dress that Daniel had purchased for her from the general store, wanting her to have something clean and respectable to wear. Her hands shook as she braided her hair, and Daniel had to help her with the buttons at the back of the dress. "You look brave," he said softly, meeting her eyes in the small mirror. "I do not feel brave," Nora replied. "Bravery is not the absence of fear," Daniel said. "It is doing what must be done despite the fear. You are one of the bravest people I have ever met, Nora Zimmerman." The courthouse was packed when they arrived. Thomas Garrett sat with his attorney at one table, his expression smug and confident. He glared at Nora as she entered, but she forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her cower. Robert Fitzgerald was already present, organizing his papers and looking focused. Deputy Wilson stood near the front, ready to testify if needed. And to Nora's surprise, Mary Chen sat in the gallery, her presence small but determined. Judge Harrison called the proceeding to order, and for the next several hours, Nora lived through what felt like a waking nightmare. Thomas Garrett's attorney painted her as a scheming woman who had seduced and manipulated his client, then turned violent when confronted about theft. He suggested she had intentionally caused the conflict between Garrett and Davies, hoping to profit from their discord. Nora sat through these accusations with clenched fists, wanting to scream the truth, but knowing she had to wait for her turn. When Robert Fitzgerald finally called her to testify, she told her story clearly and calmly. refusing to let Garrett's attorney rattle her during cross-examination. Then Fitzgerald presented Davies's written statement, arguing passionately for its admission despite the objections from Garrett's attorney. Judge Harrison read it carefully, then allowed it into evidence. Mary Chen testified next, her voice quiet but firm as she described exactly what she had heard that night. The look of pure hatred Garrett directed at her made Nora's blood run cold, but Mary did not waver. Finally, Deputy Wilson testified about the investigation and his conversations with Davies, painting a picture of a decent man caught between his conscience and fear of retaliation. When all the testimony was complete, Judge Harrison called a brief recess to consider the evidence. Nora sat with Daniel in the hallway, too anxious to speak, while Robert Fitzgerald assured them that the case had gone as well as could be hoped. After 30 agonizing minutes, they were called back into the courtroom. Judge Harrison's expression was stern as he surveyed the room. "I have considered all the evidence and testimony presented here today," he began. "This case involves serious charges against Miss Zimmerman, but it also reveals disturbing patterns of behavior by Mr. Garrett." He fixed Thomas Garrett with a hard stare. "The preponderance of evidence supports Miss Zimmerman's account of events. The written statement from Mr. Davies is compelling and detailed. The testimony of Miss Chen corroborates key elements of the story. And I find Miss Zimmerman herself to be a credible witness whose account is consistent and logical." Nora felt Daniel's hand squeeze hers as the judge continued. "In contrast, Mr. Garrett's version of events is not supported by any witness testimony and contains internal inconsistencies. Furthermore, his demonstrated behavior toward Miss Chen today, attempting to intimidate a witness, does not speak well of his character." Thomas Garrett half rose from his seat, his face red, but his attorney pulled him back down. "Therefore," Judge Harrison said, his voice ringing through the courtroom, "I am dismissing all charges against Miss Nora Zimmerman. Furthermore, I am directing Deputy Wilson to investigate whether charges should be filed against Mr. Thomas Garrett for assault, attempted assault, and reckless endangerment resulting in serious injury to Mr. Davies." The courtroom erupted in noise. Nora felt her knees buckle, and only Daniel's strong arm around her waist kept her upright. She heard Thomas Garrett shouting threats and curses, heard the judge threatening him with contempt, but it all seemed to come from very far away. "It is over," Daniel said softly in her ear. "You are free." "It is over." Nora turned into his embrace, tears streaming down her face as the full weight of relief crashed over her. She was innocent, officially and publicly exonerated. She was free. Robert Fitzgerald appeared beside them, grinning broadly. "Congratulations, Miss Zimmerman. Justice has been served today." "Thank you," Nora managed through her tears. "Thank you for believing me." "The evidence spoke for itself," Fitzgerald replied. "You were fortunate to have advocates willing to stand up for you. That does not always happen." As they left the courthouse, Mary Chen approached shyly. "I am glad you are free," she said. "I am sorry I was too frightened to speak sooner." Nora took the older woman's hands. "You spoke when it mattered most. Thank you for your courage." Outside, the afternoon sun felt warmer and brighter than any sun Nora could remember. She stood on the courthouse steps, breathing deeply, feeling as if she had been holding her breath for days and could finally exhale. "Take me home," she said to Daniel. He smiled, understanding immediately that she meant his ranch. "With pleasure." They rode back through the hills as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting everything in gold and amber light. When they reached the ranch and Daniel helped her down from Rosie, Nora stood for a long moment just looking at the modest house and barn, the grazing cattle, the endless sky. "I want to stay," she said, turning to face Daniel. "I want to take you up on your offer of work if it still stands." "It stands," Daniel said firmly. "But Nora, I need to be honest with you about something." Her heart sank slightly. "What is it?" Daniel took both her hands in his expression serious but tender. "When I offered you work, I meant it genuinely. But I also need to tell you that somewhere over these past days, my feelings have become more than just concern for someone in trouble or admiration for your courage. I have developed feelings for you that go beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I am falling in love with you, Nora Zimmerman, and while I will honor my offer of employment with no strings attached if that is what you want, I need you to know the truth of how I feel. You deserve honesty after everything you have been through." Nora felt her heart expand until she thought it might burst. "Daniel Crawford, I am already in love with you. I think I started falling the moment you looked into that stable and chose kindness over suspicion. Every day since then has only made my feelings deeper." Daniel pulled her into his arms, and this time when he held her, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. "Then stay with me, not as an employee but as my partner. Help me build something here, something that belongs to both of us. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few days, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." "Yes," Nora said, tilting her face up to his. "Yes to all of it." Daniel kissed her then, tender and sweet and full of promise. When they finally drew apart, both were smiling through happy tears. "We will need to do this properly," Daniel said. "Court you right, get married with a preacher, build you a proper home you can be proud of." "This home is already proper," Nora replied, looking at the modest ranch house. "It has you in it, and that makes it perfect." As the sun set on that momentous day, Nora and Daniel stood together on the porch of what would be their home, hands clasped, looking out at the future that stretched before them like the California valley spread at their feet. The past few days had been terrifying and uncertain, but they had also brought Nora something she had thought lost forever: a place to belong, a person to love, and the promise of a future built on truth, courage, and unexpected grace. In the weeks that followed, Nora and Daniel settled into their new life together with surprising ease. They worked side by side during the days, Nora proving herself skilled at handling the horses and managing the ranch finances, while Daniel marveled at how much more productive and pleasant his work became with a partner by his side. Deputy Wilson stopped by occasionally with news from town. Thomas Garrett had been formally charged with assault and reckless endangerment, and while his family's influence protected him from jail time, he had lost considerable standing in the community. The Silver Dollar Saloon had been sold to new owners who immediately improved conditions for the staff. Joseph Davies had recovered from his injury and left California with his family, choosing to start fresh somewhere that Thomas Garrett's reach could not extend. Daniel courted Nora with old-fashioned propriety, despite the fact that they were living under the same roof. He insisted she continue sleeping in the bedroom while he took the main room, though they spent every evening together talking, playing cards, or simply enjoying each other's company. He brought her wildflowers from the hills, taught her to ride Maverick, and shared his dreams of expanding the ranch into a place where they could raise horses to sell throughout California. 6 weeks after the hearing, on a brilliant October morning when the air was crisp and clear, Daniel and Nora were married in the small church in Willits. Deputy Wilson stood as Daniel's best man, and Mary Chen attended as Nora's witness and friend. Robert Fitzgerald and Judge Harrison both attended, the latter looking pleased to see a story that had started so dangerously end so happily. Nora wore a simple white dress purchased from a seamstress in town, and Daniel wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed and his boots polished to a shine. When they exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through whatever challenges life might bring, there was not a dry eye in the small congregation. "I never thought I would have this," Nora whispered as they left the church as husband and wife. "A home, a partner, a future to look forward to." "Neither did I," Daniel admitted. "I thought I would spend my life alone, and I had convinced myself that was enough. Thank God I was wrong." Their wedding night was spent not at some fancy hotel but back at their ranch, which now legally belonged to both of them. Daniel had prepared their bedroom with care, bringing in fresh flowers and putting clean sheets on the bed they would now share. They came together with tenderness and passion, expressing physically what words had struggled to convey. The depth of their love, the certainty of their commitment, and the joy of having found each other against all odds. As fall turned to winter and winter gave way to spring, Nora and Daniel built their life together with steady purpose. They expanded the stable, bought 3 young horses to train and sell, and planted a garden that would provide vegetables for their table. Nora proved to have a gift for training the young horses, her patience and gentle consistency producing animals that were calm and responsive. Daniel watched his wife work with growing admiration and deepening love. She had bloomed in the safety and security of their life together, her natural intelligence and strength no longer suppressed by fear and uncertainty. She suggested improvements to the ranch operations that Daniel implemented eagerly, and together they began to build something more prosperous than Daniel had managed alone. Mary Chen became a regular visitor, often bringing meals or small gifts and staying to chat with Nora about town gossip and women's concerns. Through Mary, Nora learned to navigate the social currents of Willett's society, earning respect through her hard work and Daniel's steady advocacy. On a warm evening in early June, nearly a year after Nora had first appeared in Daniel's stable, they sat together on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Nora had something important to tell Daniel, and she had been waiting for the right moment all day. "Daniel," she said, taking his hand, "I have news." He turned to her with immediate attention, reading the mixture of excitement and nervousness in her expression. "What is it?" "I am with child," Nora said, her voice soft with wonder. "Dr. Matthews confirmed it today when I went to town. We are going to have a baby." Daniel's face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, joy, concern, and finally pure elation. He pulled Nora into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "Truly, we are going to be parents, truly," Nora confirmed, laughing at his reaction. "Sometime around Christmas, the doctor thinks." Daniel pulled back to look at her face, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "How do you feel? Are you well?" "Do you need anything?" "I am perfectly well," Nora assured him. "A little tired sometimes, and the smell of coffee in the morning makes me queasy, but the doctor says that is normal." "I am happy, Daniel. Happier than I ever imagined I could be." "We need to be careful," Daniel said, already planning. "You should not be doing heavy work. I can hire someone to help with the ranch so you can rest more." "I am pregnant, not fragile," Nora said with gentle amusement. "Women have been having babies while managing households and farms for all of human history. I will be fine as long as I am sensible." But Daniel was not to be dissuaded from his protective instincts. Over the coming weeks, he insisted on taking over many of the heavier tasks Nora usually handled, earning both her exasperation and her affection. He built a rocking chair for the porch, started work on a cradle carved from oak, and read everything he could find about pregnancy and infant care. As Nora's belly grew with their child through the summer and into fall, the ranch continued to thrive. They sold 2 well-trained horses for excellent prices, hired a young man named Jack Peters to help with the heavier ranch work, and began making plans for expanding their modest home to include a proper nursery. Nora loved watching Daniel prepare for fatherhood. His joy was infectious, and his tender care for her comfort touched her deeply. He talked to her belly at night, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the horses and all the adventures they would have together. "What do you hope for?" Nora asked one night as they lay in bed, Daniel's hand resting gently on her rounded stomach. "A son or a daughter? I hope for a healthy child and a safe delivery for you," Daniel replied seriously. "Everything else is just details. Though I will admit, I have been thinking about teaching a son to ride or teaching a daughter to read the stars. Either way, I cannot wait." "You will be a wonderful father," Nora said with certainty. "Our child will be so loved." "He or she will be the luckiest child in California," Daniel agreed, "because they will have you as a mother." As Nora's due date approached in December, Daniel became increasingly nervous. He hovered constantly, insisting Dr. Matthews come out to the ranch twice a week to check on Nora, and he kept their wagon ready at all times in case they needed to get to town quickly. Nora tolerated his anxiety with patient humor, understanding it came from a place of deep love. On a cold December night, 10 days before Christmas, Nora's labor began. Daniel sent Jack racing to town to fetch Dr. Matthews and Mary Chen, while he stayed with Nora, trying to remember everything he had read about supporting a woman through childbirth, and mostly just trying not to panic. "I am fine, Daniel," Nora kept reassuring him between contractions. "Women do this every day. I am strong and everything is going to be all right." "I know," Daniel said, though his white-knuckled grip on her hand suggested otherwise. "I just wish I could do something more than stand here." "You are doing exactly what I need," Nora said firmly. "Just stay with me, do not leave." "Never," Daniel promised. "I am not going anywhere." Dr. Matthews arrived within an hour and Mary Chen shortly after, taking over with practiced efficiency. Daniel was banished to the main room where he paced frantically, flinching at every cry from the bedroom. Jack Peters sat quietly in the corner, having been told to stay in case he was needed for anything, watching his employer fall apart with barely concealed amusement. After what felt like an eternity but was actually about 6 hours, a baby's cry split the air. Daniel froze, listening with his whole body, until Dr. Matthews opened the door with a broad smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Crawford. You have a healthy son." Daniel nearly knocked the doctor over in his rush to get to Nora. She lay exhausted in the bed, her hair damp with sweat, but her face glowed with joy as she cradled a tiny bundle wrapped in clean blankets. She looked up as Daniel entered, tears streaming down her face. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Daniel approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the small red face of his child. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, one tiny fist waving in the air. Daniel felt his heart crack open in a way he had not known was possible. "He is perfect," Daniel whispered, gently touching the baby's soft hair. "You are perfect, both of you." "Would you like to hold him?" Nora asked. With shaking hands, Daniel took his son, cradling the tiny body with infinite care. The baby settled against his chest, and Daniel looked down at this new life that he and Nora had created together, feeling overwhelmed by love and responsibility and gratitude. "What should we name him?" he asked, unable to look away from his son's face. Nora smiled. "I thought perhaps David, after my father. He would have loved to meet his grandson." "David Crawford," Daniel said, trying out the name. "It is perfect. Hello, David. Welcome to the world." Over the next few weeks, as they adjusted to life with an infant, Nora and Daniel discovered new dimensions to their love. They took turns walking the floor with David during his fussy nights, changed diapers together while laughing at their own incompetence, and marveled at every new expression or sound their son made. "I never knew I could be this tired and this happy at the same time," Nora said one morning as she nursed David while Daniel made breakfast. "It is extraordinary," Daniel agreed. "My whole life has changed, and yet it feels like he has always been here. Like we were waiting for him without knowing it." As winter gave way to spring, and David grew from a tiny infant to a chubby, smiling baby, the ranch continued to prosper. Word spread about the quality horses the Crawfords raised and trained, and they began to get buyers from as far away as Sacramento and San Francisco. The modest ranch that Daniel had struggled to maintain alone was becoming a successful enterprise. On their first wedding anniversary, Daniel surprised Nora with a gold ring to replace the simple band she had worn since their hasty wedding. They stood in the same spot where they had exchanged vows, this time with baby David in Nora's arms, and Daniel slipped the new ring onto her finger. "I love you more today than I did a year ago," Daniel said. "And I loved you completely then. You have made my life richer than I ever imagined possible. You and David are my whole world." "We are so blessed," Nora replied, her eyes shining. "A year ago I was running for my life, desperate and alone. Now I have a husband I adore, a beautiful son, and a home that feels like heaven. Sometimes I wake up afraid this is all a dream." "It is not a dream," Daniel assured her, pulling both her and David into his embrace. "This is real. This is our life, and it is only going to get better." And it did get better. Over the following years, Nora and Daniel's ranch grew into one of the most respected horse operations in Northern California. They expanded their home, adding rooms for the children they hoped to have and improvements that made their daily life more comfortable. When David was 3, Nora gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Grace, who filled the house with even more joy and chaos. 2 years after that came another son, Samuel, who proved to be as horse-crazy as his father. Nora thrived as a mother, somehow managing to raise 4 children while still actively participating in running the ranch. Daniel proved to be the father Nora had known. He would be patient, loving, and endlessly engaged with his children's lives. He taught David and Samuel to ride almost before they could walk, let the twins help him in the barn from the time they were toddlers, and never failed to make time for stories or games, no matter how busy the ranch kept them. Through it all, Daniel and Nora's love continued to deepen. They maintained their tradition of sitting on the porch together in the evenings after the children were in bed, talking about their day, making plans for the future, or sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence, hands clasped. "You ever think about that night you found me in the stable?" Nora asked one evening when David was 10 and the twins were 7, and Samuel was a rambunctious 5-year-old. "Often," Daniel replied. "I think about how different my life would be if I had turned you away, or if you had chosen a different place to hide. I think about what would have happened to me if you had not been the kind of man you are," Nora said. "If you had been like so many others who would have seen an opportunity to exploit rather than help. My whole life changed in that moment when you looked into that stable and chose kindness." "My whole life changed too," Daniel said. "I was barely living before you arrived. Now I cannot imagine a day without you." As the years continued to pass, the Crawford family became a pillar of the Willits community. Nora started a ladies' sewing circle that helped raise money for the new school. Daniel served on the town council, advocating for fair treatment of laborers and speaking against the kind of exploitation that had nearly destroyed Nora all those years ago. Their children grew strong and happy, carrying on the ranch work and bringing their own personalities and talents to the family enterprise. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Daniel and Nora stood once again on their porch, now weathered and expanded to wrap around the entire house. David was 21 and running the horse training program with skill that matched his father's. The twins were 18 and preparing to attend the new teachers' college in Sacramento. Samuel was 16 and already showing signs of being a natural businessman, finding new markets for their horses and negotiating prices that impressed even the most experienced ranchers. 20 years, Nora marveled, looking out at the prosperous ranch they had built together. It has gone so fast. The best years of my life, Daniel said, pulling her close, and the best are still ahead of us. You always were an optimist, Nora teased. No, Daniel corrected. I am a realist who has learned that sometimes life gives you exactly what you need when you need it most. It gave me you when I had given up on ever having a true partner. It gave us our children, our home, this life. How can I be anything but grateful? As the sun set on that anniversary evening, painting the California sky in the brilliant colors they had witnessed together thousands of times, Nora reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her from terrified fugitive to beloved wife and mother. She thought about the girl who had fled through dark streets, certain her life was over, and wished she could tell that frightened young woman that everything would not just be okay, it would be wonderful beyond imagining. The ranch continued to thrive through the following decades. As Daniel and Nora aged gracefully into their 50s and then 60s, they gradually turned more of the daily operations over to their children, who had all remained nearby and involved in the family business in various ways. David had married a lovely woman from Sacramento and given them 3 grandchildren. The twins had both become teachers but returned home every summer to help with the busy season. Samuel had expanded the business to include selling horse equipment throughout California, proving as skilled at commerce as his father was at ranching. Daniel and Nora spent their later years much as they had spent their early ones, working side by side, talking together on the porch, and cherishing the life they had built from nothing but determination, courage, and love. When Daniel developed a persistent cough that turned out to be a lung condition from years of working outdoors, Nora nursed him with devoted care. When Nora's joints grew stiff with arthritis, Daniel learned to massage them with gentle patience, making her laugh by claiming he had learned the technique from the horses. On a spring evening when Daniel was 74 and Nora 73, they sat together on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. 8 grandchildren now, with another on the way, all carrying on the legacy of hard work, integrity, and love that Daniel and Nora had instilled in their children. I could not have imagined this, Nora said softly, her hand in Daniel's as it had been 1,000 times before. When I was young and alone and so afraid, I could not have dreamed that life could be this full, this rich, this beautiful. Neither could I, Daniel admitted. I thought my story was already written. Lonely cowboy grows old on his isolated ranch, talks to horses, and dies alone. Then you appeared, and suddenly everything changed. You gave me a reason to truly live. We gave each other that gift, Nora corrected gently. You saved my life that morning, Daniel Crawford, in more ways than you know. You gave me shelter when I was desperate, justice when I was powerless, and love when I thought I would never have a home again. Every happy day since then, every moment of joy with our children and grandchildren, every morning I wake up beside you, it is all because you chose kindness over suspicion. I chose love, Daniel said simply. Everything else followed from that. As the sun set on that spring evening, exactly 50 years after a frightened young woman had hidden in a cowboy's stable and started a chain of events that would transform both their lives. Daniel and Nora sat together in perfect contentment. They had faced challenges, weathered storms, and overcome obstacles that would have defeated lesser loves. But through it all, they had remained partners, lovers, and best friends. 50 years, Daniel marveled. Half a century since the morning I found you in my stable. The best 50 years of my life, Nora said. And if I had it to do again, I would hide in that same stable and hope for the same kind-hearted cowboy to find me. I would find you every time, Daniel promised. In this life and any other, I would always find you. As darkness fell and the grandchildren were called inside, Daniel and Nora remained on their porch, hands clasped, looking out at the land they had built together. The modest ranch that had once been Daniel's solitary refuge had become a thriving family legacy, a testament to what could be built when love and determination worked together. They had started with nothing but each other, a desperate woman seeking safety, and a lonely man ready to offer it. From that simple beginning, they had created a family, a business, and a love story that would be told to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren as proof that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures. And on that warm spring night, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and deeply loved, Daniel and Nora Crawford knew they had been given the greatest gift two people could share. A lifetime together, built on trust, strengthened by adversity, and sustained by a love that had only grown deeper with each passing year. It was more than either had dared to hope for on that morning so many years ago, when a cowboy found a woman sleeping in his stable, and she said, "I had nowhere safe to go." But by choosing kindness, choosing truth, and choosing each other, they had built something that would last far beyond their own years, a legacy of love that would echo through generations, reminding everyone who came after them that sometimes the best things in life begin with a simple act of compassion and the courage to hope for something better.